Good morning. Thanks for joining us. This is the third of the webinars about Cyber Essentials. So hello to you again if you've joined us before. So all of this recorded presentation will be available from our website from tomorrow, and you can actually access the previous two webinars on the website. You'll be able to ask questions in the chat as we go through. And while Andy is presenting, Neil, my other colleague, will be able to answer some of those questions in the chat as we go through. The presentation will only be about half an hour, and then after that we will take the opportunity, all three of us, to try and answer some more of your questions that you've been posting in the chat. At the end, we'll be able to download all the questions and we will write the answers to them all, and we will send those to you via the Eventbrite platform. So you hopefully will get an answer to all your questions. We are also going to pull together all the questions and answers from all the sessions and create one big document that again will be available to download from our website. So our main aim is to try and explain Cyber Essentials, firewalls in this session, and answer any questions that you have. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Andy, who works in our technical team and until recently was working in the British Army, and Neil will be answering your questions in the background. So he's head of our technical certification. So I will now pass over to Andy.
Thanks, Emma. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming back again for another presentation for the Cyber Essentials for Schools. As Emma said, I'm part of the tech team, and we're here to provide you support. So any questions you get stuck on within Cyber Essentials, feel free to come through to us. We're not here to provide consultancy, so we can't tell you what to put as your answers, but we can help guide you in the question set. I'm also a school governor, so I do understand some of the issues you may be facing as schools. I'm currently vice chair and chair of the Audit and Risk Committee at a local primary school. So I am very much on board and going through this as well with you guys. So it's going to be a 25 to 30-minute presentation today on firewalls. So this is the first real technical control within Cyber Essentials after last week where we discussed scope. And yeah, as Emma said, this will be followed by questions afterwards. So bear with us as well as always, there's a delay using this software between when you type your questions in and when we will get an answer to you, just because of the way that the software runs. So schools should protect their internet connected devices with a firewall. This effectively creates a buffer zone between your school's network and the internet or other networks like guest or student networks. Within this buffer zone, incoming traffic can be analysed to find out whether or not it should be allowed onto your network. So take from that is that what does a firewall do? It creates boundaries, it creates zones. So there were some issues last week when we were talking about scoping about student networks, so you can use these to create boundaries in between those networks. And also it is your first line of defense from the internet, from those internet-borne attacks. And yeah, we'll talk about some of the segregation, ways you can segregate those other networks out at the end of this presentation. So by the end of the presentation, you'll understand hopefully what a firewall is. You understand which devices need to apply the CE firewall controls to. Understand the technical requirements relating to the firewalls that must be met under Cyber Essentials scheme. So what controls you need to apply to those devices. And then we'll wrap it up by revisiting scoping to see some scenarios relating to the education sector, where firewalls can provide segregation to aid you in your application. So as before, this list is here just as a refresher for you, and all of these, this terminology is taken directly from the Cyber Essentials requirements for IT infrastructure document, which can be found on the NCSC website. So when we talk about devices, it's all types of hosts, including network equipment, servers, networks, end user equipment such as desktop computers, laptop computers, tablets and mobile phones, whether physical or virtual. So it's important there. I think that question cropped up last week about do virtual servers count? Yes, they do, because it's physical or virtual. So everything when we talk about devices is whether it's physical or virtual. Software is all operating systems, whether commercial, off-the-shelf applications, plugins, interpreters, scripts, libraries, network, software and firmware. Organizational data is electronic data belonging to you, the applicant. So that could be emails, office documents, database data, financial data. Then organizational services is really how you access that data, what controls that data. So software applications, cloud applications, and user interactive desktops are all included in that. So what is a firewall then? So all devices run network services which create some form of communication with other devices and services. By restricting access to these services, you reduce your exposure to attacks. This can be achieved using firewalls and equivalent network devices. So when we talk about network services, then these are things like emails, file servers, printing, voice over IP, World Wide Web, so that could be HTTP, HTTPS, DNS services, and time, so network time protocol. These are all kinds of services, and all these services have ports assigned to them. So if you imagine you've got your IP address that belongs to your network, so that could be from your devices, or it could be your boundaries. So you all have these IP addresses, and if you think of an IP address as an address of a block of flats, and then these services that have their ports assigned to them, you could think of that as an individual flat within that block of flats. And what you're doing is this firewall is going to control which doors open inside of that block of flats. So you're basically saying what can come in and out of that internal door, and equally back out again as well. So you can say certain IPs and certain ports will be open, and they can be accessed by certain IPs, and you can tie it right down and restrict it down, or you could equally open it up depending on your settings. So there's two types of firewall. We've got boundary firewalls and host-based firewalls. Let's talk about the boundary firewall first. These is what creates network segregation and controls traffic between networks. These can be physical, virtual, or cloud-based. And you see down the bottom, we've got some examples of some boundary firewalls and home routers. So a lot of those will have firewalls on, and you can adjust the settings to them. Okay, you'd normally do this by typing in an IP address into your browser, and that'll take you to a dashboard that you can apply these settings to, or you could, in some cases, do it from outside of your network and coming in. So we'll talk about the controls we need to apply to those to lock that down as much as possible for the settings of your firewalls. Firewall rules, when we talk about those, it's a set of IP-based rules. So say the IP address is your address of what's coming to and from you, that will allow or block internet traffic to your network. Different ways that you can block traffic or allow traffic, and this is generally known as an explicit deny, implicit deny, and then you've got explicit and implicit allow as well. So I'm just going to quickly go over the difference between those two rules so you can try and picture it a bit better. I'm just going to concentrate on the deny rules. So if you think of an implicit deny, if you think of back pre-lockdown when nightclubs were open, you could have a bouncer on the door of a nightclub, and on the door you'd have a list of people who can come into that nightclub. Back to if their name's not on the list, they're not coming in. and that would be an implicit deny rule. So you're basically stopping everybody coming in unless they are on that list. Explicit deny is where you might have another nightclub down the road that will let everybody in. However, Bouncer's got a list, but on this list, it's got a set of people that aren't allowed in because they're known troublemakers in the area. So they're explicitly denying who can come into that nightclub. So that's the difference between those rules. So you can imagine implicit deny is the most control that you would have generally, and you can proper lock down what can come in and out of your networks. At the bottom there, we're saying about those rules can be used to allow or block traffic according to its source, destination, and type of communication protocol. So when we talk about communication protocols, if you just think of those as the services that we previously discussed. So you've got two protocols, mainly TCP and UDP protocols, and then within those you've got all these different services. So just think of that as the services that you are allowing in. Okay, next up, we'll talk about host-based firewalls, often also referred to as a software firewall. These could be configured on a device. Works the same as a boundary firewall, but only protects a single device on which it is configured. Okay, so exactly the same as a boundary firewall. So if you think of the boundary firewall as your first line of defense, this is your second line of defense. Okay, and we haven't even got to, at this point, we haven't even got to the internal, like anti-malware and all that kind of stuff. That's much further down the line. This is your second line of defense. This is getting into your operating system. All host-based firewalls must be on and correctly configured at all times. Okay, and this is because if you're falling back on this could become your first line of defense. For example, if you're a remote worker and you're taking a laptop to an untrusted network like a hotel or a coffee shop, this would then become the first line of defense because you don't trust that boundary firewall. The host-based firewalls usually come as part of the operating system. So this is one of the main reasons, or this is one of the reasons why operating systems must always be supported and receiving security updates. Because as soon as they go, they don't receive security updates, you are putting down how good this firewall is going to be, the effectiveness of the firewall. So these are the technical requirements that need to be in place for your firewalls for Cyber Essentials. And when we talk about the Cyber Essentials requirements when it comes to firewalls, it applies to the boundary firewalls, desktop computers, laptop computers, routers, and servers. Okay, so that's what you need to apply these controls to. Okay, point to note there, it doesn't apply to mobile phones or tablets. Okay, so don't have to worry about those kind of devices when it comes to firewall controls. So the first thing you're going to need to do, you're going to need to change your password for the default administrative password. So a lot of routers and firewalls will come with default passwords, and these passwords, you know, they could be username admin, password, things like that. And they're generally published all over the internet. So the first thing you're going to need to do is change the default administrative password. Change it to something difficult to guess and at least 8 characters. Okay, we're going to come more in a future presentation about secure configuration. We're going to cover more about passwords in general, but for now, just ensure that your firewalls have the default administrative password changed. Something difficult to guess and at least 8 characters. Alternatively, you can completely disable remote administrative access from the firewall. So this means you would plug into the firewall and you wouldn't be connecting and using your IP address on the browsers, as I mentioned at the beginning. If there's a remote administrative access from the internet required, for example, if you've got a third party managing your networks, ensure there's a clear and documented need which is signed off by your governors or trustees, and you have one of the additional following controls in place. So you can have a second authentication factor. When we talk about that, there's multiple factors of authentication. So these are generally something you know, something you have, and something you are. So when we talk about something you know, that's normally a password, a passcode, a PIN, answer to secret questions, and you've generally used that authentication method when you've come to log on. So then the second authentication method could be something like a one-time token, which would be a password or a PIN that's sent to either a mobile device via SMS, could be sent via email, or it could be the authenticator applications that you get, and it will trigger all of these things. So that's something you have, and that's concentrating on how you get that second factor. You don't know it before that point. The third factor of authentication is something you are. So that's generally known as biometrics, and that could be retina scanning, facial recognition, fingerprint scanning, things like that. Okay, so you just have to have a second factor of authentication. Alternatively, you could enforce IP allow listing. So what this is when you've got your specifically allowed IP addresses that we spoke about previously, and only specific IP addresses are allowed to access that and connect to that device. And again, these would be generally your third-party network providers. They'd provide you with an IP address. That file will be configured to only allow those IP addresses from accessing your administrative database screen. And just to stress on the fact that it does need to be signed off. Okay, so get your governor level to sign these decisions off. Next set of technical requirements then, the rules. All inbound connections from the internet should be blocked by default. This means unauthenticated users cannot connect in without your permission. So again, this goes back to the firewall rules that we spoke about earlier. So this doesn't mean that everything's stopped from getting in. You're not stopping internet traffic. You're just stopping unauthenticated users from connecting. So don't confuse this with if you're trying to communicate with the internet. There's something you're basically initiating that connection and then allowing them back in using something called a TCP handshake, where you'll basically request information from a web server. They'll acknowledge and pass that back to you. You will then acknowledge, and then that continues in a cycle until you've got everything you need. It will continue to loop. If you have any service that's been left open, these need to be documented and signed off, possibly at an audit and risk committee meeting or full governors meeting, and they need to be regularly reviewed to ensure that they still need to be open. So that's anything you've left open on your firewall. There must be a process to ensure that you remove or disable these rules quickly when no longer needed. So you need to have something in place. So you need to have a process that ensures that these firewall rules are blocked off again when they're no longer needed. You only have open what is needed for the purpose that is stated within the business case or in your risk register, however you decide to record it. And then, as we mentioned before, host-based firewalls are your second line, or they can be your first line when you fall back on them. So they need to be correctly configured at all times. Okay, I'm just going to wrap up now with a few scoping examples that are hopefully prevalent to schools. This is where we're going to show you how boundary firewalls can also be used to help you create a boundary when trying to define your scope. And very useful for descoping various parts of the network so you don't need, you don't want to have within your scope for Cyber Essentials. So in this example, students are allowed on the school network, which would bring all devices into scope. Okay, they shouldn't be allowed on that school network, so we're going to segregate them with a firewall. The reason we're doing this is because you don't control those student phones, and you don't know what operating systems they're running. You don't know what controls are configured to them. So it's not good, smart practice to allow them onto your work networks. You can use a firewall to segregate this network to create a guest network, and whole school network will be allowed. So this is one of the exceptions we make for schools and the education sector. Is normally if somebody has a setup like this, when they're doing a whole business setup, they would not be able to receive that whole business, whole company certification. We'll call it a whole school for the purpose of this. Tied to whole school would be the insurance that you get for completing the assessment. So here we can see the firewall is stopping devices on the guest network from talking to the work network. It's also creating a second hop from the internet, which will help stop any potential malicious threats coming from those internet-borne attacks. So the first hop will be the internet gateway, and the second hop will be that firewall that's segregating those outer scope machines. So within that pink area there, you can include students, contractors, staff using the network for personal use. All of these kind of devices could be placed into this network. Also, if you've got any tablets for classrooms, things like that, they could be placed in there as well, as long as they're not needed to access your staff, your work network. So they're for sort of like learning purposes only. So example 2, this time you may have some unsupported machines within your school. These may be needed for certain tasks, so you cannot update them, but will cause a fail to Cyber Essentials. You can segregate them using a firewall, but this time whole school would not be achieved. So the difference here is these machines in the red area down the bottom right of that diagram, these machines are they belong to the school, they're used for their organisational services. So in this scenario here, we're using the school in question may have an attack lab set up, potentially for an IT or a cyber security project, and it consists of an attack machine that by its nature is insecure, and then it's also got a vulnerable server and a vulnerable machine that could be the victim machines. So quite clearly, these would be a failure of Cyber Essentials. You'd need an additional firewall to segregate this, and the reason you wouldn't put them on your guest network is because that'll be irresponsible putting on attack machines into your guest network or other. You're not creating that boundary still between the guest network and the school machines. In this scenario, the certificate would read something on your Cyber Essentials certificate. It would be something like whole school excluding computer test lab or something similar to that. Okay, that would mean that you wouldn't be eligible for the cyber security insurance. There is a way around it though, which I'll show you here in the next example. It's exactly the same sort of scenario with your attack machines. However, this time you're using the firewall to block internet access using an implicit deny rule. Okay, there are exceptions to this. You're allowed to allow 1 or 2 individual IPs in that can be used to update those machines when needed, but only 1 or 2, you can open it up. Because you've now taken internet access away from those machines, you can now receive whole school certification again. Okay, so there is a way around it. There are other ways of achieving this. You could completely take these machines off the network. If you were doing this, you could wire them in, and then you could use removable media as a way to update them. And then you wouldn't even need to count them when you're considering your scoping, because they're not even plugged in to the internet. But in this scenario, they are formed on the network. You've just segregated them away. But main thing to take away from this is it is possible to still get a whole school certification if you block the internet off using a firewall. Then the last example we're going to cover is a MAT. So sometimes it's just simpler and easier to break things down. Okay, this could be for various different reasons. It could be financial, It could be that the schools all have different suppliers, maybe different ways of working. Potentially you've had a mat of 3 schools and then another 3 have joined through various times. So you're all at different stages of your cyber security maturity. So the easiest way to gain the certification would be to apply as 6 separate schools. So in this scenario, you've got one MAT WAN, so wide area network. You can see there at the bottom, you've got the WAN firewall, and then all of the schools, the 6 different colors there, they have access through that firewall. If you put a boundary firewall at the edge of each school, this would be enough to segregate those off, and you could have 6 separate certifications. It would mean that the governor level of each school would have to sign off, so each school's board rather than a MAT board would have to sign it off. But it certainly could make things a lot simpler, depending on when you start looking at the scopes of the MAT, if you are part of a MAT, and maybe a simpler route to go. You could also just segregate half of the schools if you wish. So you could segregate 3 and then do the other 3 as a MAT. But if you did do that and you applied as a MAT encompassing 3 schools, again, you would not be eligible for the insurance because you would only be certifying 3 of the schools. Okay. So it all depends on how you apply the Cyber Essentials rules and how you apply for your individual schools or MATs or academies. Okay, so that wraps that up for firewalls. Look forward to answering some questions now.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Andy. We've got a few questions coming through, so please do continue to put your questions in the chat, and we will answer them, the ones that we can. As I said, the whole presentation will be available from our website to watch again from tomorrow, and we'll also be able to share the questions and answers at a later date. I will pass over to Neil now, who will talk a little bit about the questions that we've had so far.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Yeah, I'm just going through some of the questions that are coming through. Let me just have a look, see. Let's deal with the one about iPads. If you have out-of-date iPads but require internet access but no other network connectivity, could you create them in the same scenario as a student mobile data and PCE compliant? They're school-owned devices. They don't need to be. With a student devices, student mobile data, depends what data they're accessing when it comes to that. Because if they have a data card in them and they're accessing same data as other in-support devices, that would be classed as organizational data, which brings those devices into scope. You're going to need to do some kind of segregation here to take those devices out of scope on a separate network. Depends how they're where the data is located as well. So these are we understand. We had a lot of feedback about unsupported iPads last week, and we know this is an immense challenge for you guys out there, but there is no quick and easy answer to this because there are many schools have different scenarios for use of these devices. So this is where a little bit of consultancy might be required. Okay, that one.
I can answer the one about the LGFL supplied firewall. So
yeah,
we have a firewall managed by LGFL. I'm taking it that's a third party or provider. If that's the case, then yeah, that's absolutely fine. But you need to, if they're protecting your network, they're protecting your data. So if you were to get a breach, it wouldn't be them. I mean, they may share the blame, but it would still be you that got into trouble. So think of it that way. And if that's the case, then yeah, it's absolutely fine for them to be managed, but you need to ensure that the controls are managed. This can be done through a SLA or a contractual agreement, and you need to make it your business to know how they're achieving it as well, so you can answer the questions. So it's absolutely fine that somebody else is managing it, as long as you are completely aware of what's going on within your infrastructure.
Okay. If you were to fail CE, could you go away, make necessary changes and reapply for CE? And how long would to make those changes? Yes, you get a secondary submission of Cyber Essentials, and depending on Emma, can you just comment on this one, because I think we've got an agreement on how long we can do this.
Yes,
or how long the changes are.
Yeah, so usually organisations have 2 working days to make the changes and then resubmit, and that is quite flexible. So we quite often get an organisation that will contact us and say, oh, you know, it's actually going to take me a week because of, you know, this factor, or I can't get hold of my IT company. So in cases like that, we often do give small extensions. What we really don't want is for people to think, oh, I've got, you know, months, so I'll go and I'll do it another time, and it just never gets done. With the schools pilot, so for those of you that are on the schools pilot, we have agreed that it'll be 2 weeks is the standard time where you'll be able to go away, get things sorted out, and then resubmit without having to pay again. So, and again, that is quite flexible, but it's the 2 weeks is, you know, you don't need to tell us, you just resubmit within 2 weeks. But if there's an issue with that 2 weeks, then please let us know, and we'll do what we can to try and accommodate you.
Cool. Organisational, have you finished for that one, Neil? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Organisational data is data access from the MIS fall under the organisational data category. If it's school data, then yes, it would. So we'd consider the MIS as the organisational service that accesses that data. Okay, so yeah, data accessed from it is included in that.
Sorry, I can comment on the time frame for achieving the Cyber Essentials in the schools pilot. So usually when somebody applies, they have at least 6 months on the assessment platform before they have to submit. So you've been given, so for those of you on the pilot, you've been given the link to all the information in advance. So you can download the question set, you can see all the guidance documents, you can go through the pre-Cyber Essentials tool, and you can get all that prepared before you even apply. And then once you've applied, from that point, there'll be 6 months. Again, if there's any particular reason why you have to make it longer, then just let us know, and we will try and accommodate you. But there's no massive hurry. You can certainly do all that work over the summer. But what I would say is not to think you've got lots and lots of time and you'll just do it another time, because if you're like me, there'll always be other things that you're doing. So the best thing to do is to try and make as much progress on it as possible. And yeah, let us know if you've got questions about it. Use the guidance, and yes, you'll have more than 6 months, I think.
Okay, there's one here about the pilot. Does that mean we should hold off completing the questionnaires until after Easter holidays?
So, so you can complete the questionnaires at any point. So you can download the question set from the website and get on with that. And that's completely for free. Anyone can do that. And those are exactly the same questions that you'll be asked. So you can get on with that at any time. I don't think the link is live yet where you actually apply to do the assessment. When you actually apply, you'll get the login details on the secure assessment platform, and you'll just see the same questions where you'll have to complete them. So you can just answer them there and there, or you can copy and paste from a spreadsheet that you prepared beforehand. Now, again, you can do that at any point, and you can when you're filling that in, if you log out, then it will have saved them, and you can just log in and carry on again at any point, and that can take 6 months, no problem at all. So you can get started on that before or after or during the Easter holidays.
Okay, thank you, Emma. We are a mat with 3 schools that are all on the same WAN, which is managed by a third-party school-specific broadband supplier and use the same Active Directory. The schools are on a separate internet feed, which are of course firewalled off, but we have a single AD. Yes, this is perfectly acceptable. It's a scenario we see in other businesses. Yes, this is acceptable, and you should be able to achieve CE under as the mat there, as long as it fits the requirements. Yes, that's no problem at all. Just remember, I think it refers back to a question earlier where it was making you'd need to document the ports that are open. That's a requirement of Cyber Essentials to allow the AD communication through. Just make sure those are documented to answer one of the questions. Okay.
I think that is the end of the questions.
It
Not
does
as
look like
many this time.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, as I said, this will be available on the website tomorrow. We'll send you the questions and answers at some point soon. And if you have any other questions in the meantime, then just email us at info@iasme.co.uk, or you can ring us. And yes, we'll be doing another webinar like this tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing you then. And yes, good luck with it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.